Ladies and gentlemen, this segment is called #US2, Left Out by the Left. Please welcome, from Ethics and Public Policy Center, Mona Charen, from the Daily Signal, Kelsey Harkness, and from the Catholic Association, Ashley Mcguire. Moderated by Marji Ross of Regnery Publishing.
Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. We're delighted to be with you. So, we're going to be talking about #US2, Left Out by the Left, or as we like to call it, how conservative women can retake the leadership role with women across the country in a #MeToo environment. Let me do some quick introductions and then we're going to dive right in because we have a lot to cover. I'm Marji Ross. Shouldn't have done that, sorry. I'm Marji Ross. I'm president and publisher of Regnery Publishing. We are, as many of you know, the oldest and leading publisher of conservative political books in the country. Chances are, if you have a book in your home, on your bookshelf, in your library, you have a Regnery book. And we've been publishing great conservative books for 70 years. I have been, thank you, I've been honored and privileged to be the president of the company for the past 15 years. And that's enough about me. Down at the end, we've got Mona Charen, as you know, a syndicated columnist, a best-selling author, best-selling Regnery author, may I add, senior fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. She was a regular for many years on CNN's Capital Gang and Capital Gang Sunday, and she currently co-hosts with Jay Nordinger the weekly podcast Need to Know. She also has a new book coming. As a publisher, I know it's important to mention this. She has a new book coming called Sex Matters, coming out this June. So welcome, Mona. Thank you for joining us. Next to Mona, we've got Kelsey Harkness. Kelsey is a senior producer at the Heritage Foundation's Daily Signal. She's also co-host of the weekly podcast Problematic Women. I love that title. She's also the 2017-18 Tony Blankley Fellow at the Steamboat Institute. She's a contributor to The Federalist and an editor at Bright, which is a daily email for women by women. Welcome, Kelsey.
Thank you.
And to my immediate left, I've got Ashley Mcguire. Ashley writes and speaks widely about religion, feminism, politics. She is the author of another Regnery book, Sex Scandal, The Drive to Abolish Male and Female. And Ashley's writing has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, Time, USA Today, many other places. She lives in Washington, D.C. with her husband and 3 children. Welcome, Ashley.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, we've got a lot to cover, so we're going to get right to it. You know, as the publisher of Regnery, I have worked with many high-profile conservative women, including Ann Coulter, Sarah Palin, Michelle Malkin, Laura Ingraham, Katie Pavlich, Second Lady Karen Pence, of course, Mona and Ashley. And there's a question I like to ask them. As a board member of the Clare Boothe Luce Policy Institute, I actually am able to speak to hundreds of young conservative women from colleges across the country. And there's a question they ask me. And as the mother of 3 daughters, all in their 20s, there's a question that I would like to help them answer. So here's the question I'm going to ask it of each of our panelists. Do you consider yourself a feminist?
So this issue gets young women so confused. They've been told that to be a feminist is to be pro-woman and to want what is best for women. And if you define it that way, I think we would all say, yes, we are feminists. But unfortunately, over the last 50 years, the actual feminist movement that has been at work in American society has been quite different. It has had an agenda that, alas, has embraced an attack on the family, androgyny, the belief that there are no innate differences between men and women, and that this has to be orthodoxy, it has to be taught, and you have to, if it's wrong, you will get in trouble if you deny it. And finally, abortion. So that triumvirate has turned off a lot of women like me and like many others. And so when we're asked, are you a feminist? I would say, I'm pro-woman, but not that kind of a feminist.
There we go. Kelsey, how do you answer that?
What I think is so great about this question is that on the conservative side, there is room to agree to disagree. As we go down the line here, you're going to get different answers. You probably all have different answers out there. If you are a woman on the left, there's only one way to be a feminist. And I think it's great that we're able to have diversity of thought on our side, whether or not you're a feminist. So to answer your question, I don't reject the term feminism, and I do consider myself a feminist because I think there's so much important work that I am forever indebted to from the first wave feminist like Susan B. Anthony, that if I wholly reject the term feminism, I'm doing women like her an injustice. So I am a feminist, but you're not going to see me walking around with "this is what a feminist look like" t-shirt, because I agree the term has been incredibly hijacked by groups like Planned Parenthood, and we need to take that back.
Right. Ashley.
So I want to be a feminist, but I don't know what that means anymore. And I think that's a part of why when you poll people, you see something like 1 in 5 Americans identifies with that label. But those same Americans would all agree that, you know, women, there shouldn't be discrimination against women. And I think a big part of the problem has been Hollywood. You look at someone like Emily Ratajkowski, who appeared in a music video for a song that was considered to be about rape, and then went on the cover of Cosmopolitan magazine and said, I can sleep with who I want, wear what I want, and still call myself a feminist. It confuses people. So I very much agree with my fellow panelists that I think it's time to reclaim that phrase, reclaim the word. I think this is the project for the next generation of women, is to take it back. And I really, you know, there's been multiple waves of feminism. I think it's time for another one.
Totally agree. So how do we retake it and how do we define it? What would you say if you wanted to call yourself a feminist? How would you define that? What would you say?
Well, I think feminism, to succeed, to move into the next wave, has to do 2 things. The first is to unhook itself from the hookup culture, because nothing has been worse for women, I think, than the hookup culture and abortion, which enables it. And that's really the second thing, I think, is to, and I don't know exactly how to do this, but I do think women on the right are trying really hard to release the women's empowerment movement from the grip of the abortion lobby. When you look at the March for Women, the fact that pro-life women were told, sorry, you're not welcome here, I mean, that really sums up where things stand.
Right.
I agree with you. I think that's an incredibly difficult question, and part of the reason why we're here today talking about this issue. I think for the last year, the Women's March has defined what feminism is, which makes it all the more difficult for us to take it back now when you have millions of women on the streets fighting for this idea of feminism, when if you go and actually attend these marches and talk to these women and ask them what policies they really support, I find that very few of them actually agree with the policies that the Women's March actually promotes on their website. So a lot of these quote-unquote feminists today, I would argue, aren't maybe as extreme as we think they are when you look at their leadership, but it requires a communication on our behalf. I think we need better communications as conservative women to connect with young women, to show you that we are pro-woman, we can be feminists, and a different type of feminist exists to include you.
I totally agree. I think when I talk to a lot of young women, they're looking for another definition. They're looking for a group to belong to, and they're looking for other women that agree with them. And I think especially young women, they don't want to be perceived as anti-woman, and there's nowhere else for them to go, because the sort of radical feminists have elbowed out all the other points of view. Mona.
So the subtitle of my book is titled Sex Matters, and the subtitle is How Modern Feminism Has Lost Touch with Science, Love, and Common Sense. So one of the ways that we, thank you, available on Amazon for pre-order. One of the ways that we have to repair feminism and make it more relevant to young women is to get off this idea that we have to deny the science, that we have to say, no, there are no differences, everything is socially constructed, there are no innate differences between us. So that's, and I talk about that at length in the book, the evidence is it's not even controversial. But the other thing is that the feminist movement really went wrong when it said that anything that was the male model was the thing that women had to be.
Right.
And instead of saying, no, the female model is a great model, and most women prefer to have different priorities in their lives than men do, and that's fine. Not only is it fine, our whole society desperately needs it.
Right.
And so we have to ratify women's choices when they say, I'm going to cut back at work, I'm going to take care of my kids more, and we have to push back against the Sheryl Sandberg message, which is, don't do that. That's, she wrote a bestseller called Lean In. As somebody who leaned out to raise 3 sons over the period of about 25 years, I am so glad I did. I have no regrets, and other women in my position feel the same way.
Next question for you ladies. When you think of the feminist movement today, what really makes your blood boil? I'll start with Kelsey.
All right, so there's a lot that makes my blood boil. There's a lot to this question. I think some of the easier and more obvious answers are how hypocritical they often are. Their support for abortion, which is actually killing women in the womb. But I'll tell you personally what really gets to me is groups like the Women's March, which again, I do believe is what is defining feminism today, is their exclusion of women internationally. So this includes the Me Too movement. So their version of feminism is often very selfish. It's often about me. Don't get me wrong, Me Too is very important. I'm important, you're important. But the reason I love the name of this panel so much, Us Too, is because it's about all of us. It's about an inclusive version of feminism where I'm not just worrying about myself as a woman here in the United States. I'm worried about the women across the seas who are facing issues like female genital mutilation. And those women are never talked about. Not only do they face practices like FGM, then they are often forced into an arranged marriage where on their wedding night, the man that they're being forced to marry believes it's his right to get sexual pleasure by ripping her open after she's faced FGM. And I'm sorry to be graphic, but I think we need to be talking about these issues more. So every time I see the Women's March, whose tagline is women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights, it makes my blood boil when I see them being silent on the women in Iran who are risking arrest, risking their lives on the street to take off their hijabs.
Right.
They have been silent time and time again. Anytime women in the Middle East or African countries are making progress fighting for their rights, they have such a platform and they don't use it for those women because they're only thinking about themselves.
Right. Exactly. Ashley, what makes your blood boil?
I think I would say it's the fact that in today's society, to be considered an empowered woman, it's that you have to be a card-carrying supporter of Planned Parenthood, or you are somehow a disappointment to women. That's what gets my blood boiling, because nothing has been worse for women than abortion. No entity, no company has done more to profit off of women's suffering and to lie to women and to deceive women than Planned Parenthood.
Mona, what gets you riled up?
So I agree with everything my fellow panelists have said. And I could say that the misuse of data, like the so-called 77 cents on the dollar figure, which is a statistic that's impossible to kill, even though it's false. But I'm actually going to twist this around a bit and say that I'm disappointed in people on our side for being hypocrites about sexual harassers and abusers of women who are in our party, who are sitting in the White House, who brag about their extramarital affairs, who brag about mistreating women. And because he happens to have an R after his name, we look the other way, we don't complain. This is a party that was ready to endorse, the Republican Party endorsed Roy Moore for the Senate in the state of Alabama, even though he was a credibly accused child molester. You cannot claim that you stand for women and put up with that.
Well, this is a really interesting point, because there's been this, and there are many, but there's been this explosion of sexual harassment scandals, and in many cases, accusation has been equal to conviction, right? Many people get accused, and that's all anyone needs. And I think for our panel, one of the really important questions is, what has caused this sudden sort of explosion of all of these scandals, and has it been good for women? Ashley, right?
So whenever I talk about issues like this, I always say, if you want to see where we're going, look at college campuses. They're about 10 to 15 years ahead of where the rest of the country is going in terms of insanity. And I was in college not that long ago, and it was a typical sight to walk out of my dorm room and see a man walking around in a towel. I was fortunate enough to have a single-sex bathroom, but I did not have a single-sex floor. And one of the men that lived on my floor ended up being expelled because he sexually assaulted women. And so I think, what colleges have done is throw men and women together, pretend like there's no differences between them, and then add alcohol, and then step back and say, oh my gosh, everybody's being raped. What's going on?
How did this happen? Right.
And you have a similar phenomenon going on in our culture, where you look at these Harvey Weinstein stories, and he was meeting women in hotel rooms, and it's considered acceptable for men and women to have meetings in hotel rooms today, a room whose sole purpose is for sleeping and bathing. So I think that a large cause of what's happened is that we've stripped away all of these cultural norms that were there to protect women, the respect, the honor, the dignity of women, and also of men, too.
Right.
And what you have instead is everybody still throttling full speed ahead in the other direction. Colleges are now introducing multi-sex dorm rooms, all the while wondering why they have this rape crisis. So I think that's a big part of it.
Good. Kelsey.
I think the Me Too movement has been very important for women, because if you talk to a handful of women, there's no doubt at least one of them will have experienced some sort of harassment or assault or know someone who did. Clearly, this conversation was long overdue. But I also do not blame conservatives and conservative women for being skeptical about the Me Too movement and proceeding with caution. Because we just saw this happen with the Women's March, when an organization launched claiming to represent all women, and clearly it excluded us. So I think Me Too has a lot to prove, because of the Women's March, to conservative women that this can be good for you too. And also I think the feminists who are really leading establishment liberal feminists who are leading Me Too need to stop equating and conflating sexual harassment with sexual assault. Those are two very different things,
Right.
and it's even expanded to catcalls. And the more they do that, the more they drive conservative women away. And I think this is an issue that we all can and should support.
Right. I agree. I mean, I think also one of the things that doesn't get talked about is how this whole hashtag Me Too is increasingly driving men and women apart. It's not good for women, it's not good for men, and it's not good for our society because it's driving a wedge between us. And as you say, Kelsey, the more things that really aren't harassment get lumped into being harassment, the more afraid and incapable we will be as a society to work together, to communicate together, to talk to each other.
Because we have repealed, as a society, going back to the sexual revolution, we have repealed every single guardrail that used to protect women in relation to men. And so women do not know what they should expect. They don't know that it's not okay to go to a man's apartment on a first date, et cetera, et cetera. That does not, of course, excuse men. Many bad men do take advantage of this new environment. And so the jerks and the louts and the rapists are getting away with a lot. And I agree with Kelsey that I have talked with lots of young women. They all know somebody who has been assaulted, which is, and again to agree, assault is not the same thing as a bad date.
Right.
So.
Right. And you know, I worry, honestly, I worry about the young men as well as the young women because they have no idea what to do. So, that's right. You can.
Actually,
the good guys, right?
Speaking of bad guys, there was quite an interesting person. Quite an interesting person who was on this stage the other day. Her name is Marion Lepen. Now, why was she here? Why was she here? She's a young, no longer in office politician from France. I think the only reason she was here is because she's named Le Pen. And the Le Pen name is a disgrace. Her grandfather is a racist and a Nazi. She claims that she stands for him. And the fact that CPAC invited her is a disgrace.
Well, all right. Well, we're going to get back to the closing question because I want to I don't want to leave here without giving some advice. Help putting together some, hold on. Well, let's figure out how to help young conservative women. Let's figure out what we can do to help them, to equip them to feel a pro-woman agenda coming from us, coming from conservatives. What does that look like?
I think it starts with stepping back and building it from an understanding of woman as a whole, not building a platform as the left has done by basically denying one of the most essential parts of women, which is motherhood. So trying to build up respect and reverence for motherhood. I gave the example on a different CPAC panel I was on of Hillary Rosen when she famously went on TV instead of Ann Romney, who raised, I think, 5 boys, that she's never worked a day in her life. So starting with trying to restore a respect for motherhood. And, I think that there's interesting policies out there, policy ideas that are out there that do that. I think Deb Fischer had a part of this tax bill that actually proposes a conservative approach to paid family leave, one that doesn't penalize businesses, but one that offers them incentives. Things like that, I think, are the direction that we want to be going in, not more policies and more laws that are about denying women in the name of reproductive rights.
Right. Mona.
If we want an audience with young people, we have to separate ourselves from the men on our side who have behaved atrociously toward women. They won't listen to us until we do.
All right. Good. Kelsey.
From the international #US2 view of feminism, which is what I think we should all be embracing, I think we need to stop allowing liberal feminists to equate injustices with actual inequalities that are happening to women around the world. And I think we all need to be a voice for those inequalities that are happening in the Middle East and in African countries. Those women really need us. And on the domestic front, I think a pro-woman's agenda means having a conversation with your daughters to explain that just because I'm against forcing the government to pay for and provide you a maternity leave plan doesn't mean that I don't think you should have access to a maternity leave plan through a good company that can afford it. I think domestically it means holding up good examples of companies and people who are treating women with this respect in the private industry and not teaching young girls and our daughters to depend on the government for their happiness.
Wonderful. All right. Well, I want to thank you all very much. I want to thank my panelists for a lively exchange. If there's one last bit of advice you have or comment you have for the daughters out there, what do we need to tell them? Mona.
The truth. Men and women are different. We bring complementary and wonderful qualities to one another. And there's a need in our society for a lot more tenderness, love, care, and support, not constant sexual warfare.
Right. Kelsey.
I would tell them that you are more powerful than you think, and you are lucky to be born in a country where you do have equal rights. And because of that, I think we have an obligation to use our voice as women, as feminists, to speak up for those who don't.
Great. Ashley.
I would say that feminism is not a done deal, that just as there have been multiple waves of feminism, this is the moment to make the change, to be the change that you want to see, because it's up to us.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you.